Hello everyone, DarkOfAllTrades here. I'm currently working with another YouTuber on a script addressing some of the most common arguments for the existence of a god that apologists like to use that sound really deep, especially to people who already believe. And in the meantime, I wanted to put out some content addressing the more common questions we atheists get fairly regularly. In this video, from the channel James Liang, he responds to a TikTok from an atheist addressing a few of these questions in a very brief manner. As usual, I have not watched the entire video as of writing this sentence, but my interest is piqued. So let's take a look at a response to questions for atheists.
So it seems like this TikToker has some familiarity with common questions that Christian apologists use in conversation with atheists, and is offering her responses to them, although with a detectable hint of snark. Good on her for thinking through these questions, but I think after this video, you'll see that her answers leave much to be desired.
Well, of course they do. This is a TikTok with short text answers using a common music audio for the format. This video seems to be meant to provide short, relatively dismissive answers. While I don't know this TikToker, I can understand why any atheist would give the answers she does. She ends her video with the message, quote, "Stop disrespecting atheists," end quote. This leads me to believe the answers were supposed to be short answers to end the conversation. In one, she literally says, quote, "I literally don't care," end quote. So yes, that answer is deeply unsatisfying from a philosophical perspective, but she clearly isn't trying to give all-encompassing answers to satisfy anyone's curiosity. Making this argument ignores the point of the video.
If you're of the same mind as her, here are 3 things you should consider. Number 1, the dialectic.
This is something I think you missed entirely. This person is clearly not trying to work with the apologist to come to some sort of truth. Realistically, it seems like she wants to be left alone. Often, atheists are approached by religious people and asked questions. I know I have, and have heard many others relay their experiences of being questioned by strangers and family members about their lack of belief. This may surprise you, James. Can I call you James? But most atheists don't care about these questions. They're busy with work, paying bills, raising a family, engaging in hobbies, and overall just living life. Most people don't study philosophy enough to recognize what logical fallacy a person commits in any given discussion. Ask any random person about the Euthyphro dilemma, and chances are they will have no idea what you're talking about. So, to ask an average person on TikTok to, quote, "consider the dialectic," is like asking you over dinner to think about the farm that grew the food you're eating. Yeah, it could be important, but are you going to field questions about which type of cow your steak came from, or the soil from the field where the corn was grown? I don't think so.
On a personal level, you're free to say that you don't believe in hell and you don't care how the universe started. I understand, and I can respect that. But on the philosophical level, that's not good enough.
Well, she wasn't engaged in a philosophic debate, so this likely isn't her concern. She was probably venting on her TikTok about being bothered by religious people. If you want a philosophic conversation, there are plenty of people who would be happy to engage with you on this idea. Call the Atheist Experience. Tell them I sent you, and they probably won't know who I am, but it's worth a shot, right?
Remember, we're offering Christianity as a hypothesis for explaining the data.
So we're moving from philosophy to a scientific explanation? We can do that. The problem is, you have an unfalsifiable hypothesis. We can't even test your hypothesis to check the data. What we can do is examine the hypothesis and see the multitude of issues with the hypothesis itself. I'd be happy to go over these issues if there's interest, but this isn't quite what this video is about.
It makes more sense that evil people who live like kings in this life are punished in the afterlife rather than getting off scot-free.
Why? Why does it make more sense? At least this is an argument of some kind. Let's go over a couple of issues with it. First, can you demonstrate that there is an afterlife? This is something that is simply asserted but never demonstrated. You need to show an afterlife exists before you can make claims about what happens during that afterlife. Second, let's say I grant that there is some form of afterlife. I don't, but let's just move past that burden. How did you determine that there is punishment for something done in the current life that happens in the afterlife? What is that punishment and how do you know? This boils down to an appeal to emotion fallacy. I want it to be the case, or I don't like if it was not the case, therefore it is the case.
And it makes more sense that a necessary mind caused the universe rather than it popping into being uncaused out of nothing.
So this is part of one of the bigger arguments that requires a little bit of thought to take apart. It is basically a cosmological argument. It has been torn apart time after time. I'll go over it more in another video, but here's a short response. Again, why does it make more sense? You're just asserting it and not showing anything. So what are the problems with this bald assertion? First, it is a false dichotomy. I could grant that your answer makes more sense, which I don't, but that still would not make your answer correct. How did you rule out a cause from a non-necessary mind? How did you rule out it being caused by something that isn't a mind? There are other options that you are blatantly ignoring just to make this argument. Second, this is a clear straw man argument. The overwhelming majority of atheists, likely this TikToker as well, do not assert that the universe was uncaused. And more likely, they would say they don't know why the universe exists. They likely don't study cosmology, astrophysics, or quantum mechanics. I also doubt you have any expertise in these areas as well, but maybe you explain more later in the video. The scientists that do say the universe was uncaused could go into evidence including the Hawking-Penrose singularity theorems that are based on Einstein's general theory of relativity, and the recently introduced quantum cosmological models of the early universe. Third, the idea that a necessary mind is required to cause the universe is a literal God of the gaps argument. You don't know how the universe came to be, therefore it must have been a god with these attributes. But you don't actually have sufficient justification to warrant this conclusion. It's a big, I don't know, therefore God.
If you disagree, you have to explain why your hypothesis is better than ours.
Nope, I sure don't. This is the idea that I'm right, prove me wrong, and is potentially multiple fallacies in one. Initially, it's a shifting of the burden of proof. It's not up to me to prove your hypothesis is bad in order for me to not accept it. It is up to you to show your hypothesis should be accepted. If I say humans were made by space aliens who use the Earth as a petri dish, then you can ask me to prove it. And if I say you disagree, therefore you have to not only come up with a hypothesis, but explain why it's better than mine, you could rightfully challenge that. I could go over why that hypothesis is superior to the idea of a god, including that it makes less assumptions and does not appeal to the supernatural at all, and you would be stuck trying to prove your god not only exists, but actually made humans. You have an unfalsifiable supernatural argument to try to say it is better than my natural argument. If I did a card trick, something I do pretty regularly, and I tell you it is because I actually have magic powers, and you don't believe me, your inability to give me a better explanation to how I can do a card trick does not mean that I have magic powers by default. This brings us to the next fallacy. This is an argument from personal incredulity. If you don't see any other reason as to why the universe exists, therefore it must be a god, then you are committing this fallacy. It is okay to say that you don't know something. If you had sufficient evidence, then you should submit it for peer review and overturn the scientific consensus, win the Nobel Prize, and a bunch of money from theistic organizations like the Templeton Foundation, who are actively trying to scientifically prove that a god exists, and have vested interest in doing so. You could be rich and use that money to do a lot of good, so why haven't you?
Number 2, the motivations. Christians are often portrayed in popular media as fear-mongering fanatics who scare little children with pictures of fire and brimstone.
Sometimes they are. Why do you think this is? Could it be that popular media is trying to sensationalize this trope of the fire and brimstone religious fanatic? Maybe that character is supposed to be loud and obnoxious because it is a characterization of actual Christians that some people deal with on a regular basis. I don't know where you live, but in many places in the United States, especially the South, religious fanatics are very common and very loud. I'll throw you a bone here and say that I don't think these characterizations necessarily represent the average Christian. My grandparents were very religious, but outside of church or talking about what they did that week with friends, they never really brought up their religion outside of their home. They were more active in their church than nearly all of the other members, with my grandmother being the choir director and part-time secretary of the church, and my grandfather in the choir as well as doing Bible study. However, even with all of that, they are closer to what the average Christian looks like. I will point out the fun fact that Captain America is a Christian, so maybe you have a bit of bias here. There are plenty of Christians in popular media who don't yell and scream about hellfire and brimstone. They don't try to force their religion on others. Maybe all you see from their character is a cross necklace. Count them next time and see what your numbers look like.
Unfortunately, this depiction is sometimes accurate, and I condemn people who do this as much as you do. If there are people in your life who've tried to convert you using fear tactics, I'm really sorry. They should have known better.
Thank you for this. It means a lot in this situation. Yes, using fear tactics for the belief in the supernatural is likely immoral, especially when it's done to children. You have earned my respect for taking time to recognize and address this issue.
Just because the idea of hell is scary doesn't mean that it's real, and to suggest otherwise would be appealing to emotion rather than reason. But that being said, there is a legitimate way of bringing up the idea of hell. If it's possible that you can end up in hell, then you have really good reasons to do more research and find out if it's real, and if so, how you can avoid it.
That if is doing a lot of heavy lifting for this point. How can you demonstrate that hell is a real place? From there, even if you could show that there is a location called hell with fire and brimstone, you would have to demonstrate the possibility of going there. Until then, you have no reason to suspect that it is possible. So you have your work cut out for you, and until you show it's possible, I'm not going to lose a single wink of sleep over this non-hypothesis.
Unless you're really confident that hell isn't real, maybe you should care a bit more about how the universe started.
Nope, that's not how that works. You are again trying to shift the burden of proof here with some very Weasley language. You're proposing the idea that a hell exists and doing what you did before, saying, prove me wrong. Replace hell with anything and try to make the same argument. Unless you're really confident that vampires aren't real, maybe you should care a bit more. This is not an argument for the existence of vampires, or even a good reason to care about the existence of vampires. If you aren't sure if vampires exist or not, then maybe you should take precautions just in case. Let this idea that vampires might exist affect how you live your life. It is an absurd idea. As a note, I wrote that whole response before I listened to the last few words. Rather than going back and changing everything, my response is still relevant to the way of thinking. However, on top of this, even if a place which we would call hell exists, how does that affect how the universe started? How does the idea of an afterlife affect how the universe started? Could there be an afterlife and no God? Could a God exist but not have created the universe? Could a God exist and not have created hell? There are far too many questions that don't have a sufficient answer for this to be anything other than just, I wonder. What you have here is a non sequitur. The existence of a hell has no connection on how the universe started. If there is a hell, you also start approaching Pascal's wager and all the problems with that. You happen to accept one non-hypothesis claim, but there are countless other non-hypothesis claims just like yours with minor differences. How do we determine which, if any, is correct? We can't. That is the problem.
And lastly, number 3, the arguments. When you say that you came up with your morals on your own, it sounds like you're understanding morality as a set of rules that you chose to live your life by. That's not what the Christian apologist means when he talks about morals. We're talking about the moral obligations that people have to one another.
I reject that she thinks it is a set of rules that she chooses to live by. I don't think morality is a choice. It is just part of being human. I don't choose whether I think something is good or not, but rather I discover whether I think something is good or not. This is more likely what she means by came up with on my own. We discover what we find moral or immoral on our own. Perhaps this is imprecise wording on her part, so I could forgive you for your interpretation. There isn't much difference in definitions you provided, though. The set of rules by which one lives their life would include the obligations they have to another person, group, or even themselves. Morals are something involved with or related to what is considered good or bad behavior. That may be a bit clearer of a meaning, though the question being asked here may have more to do with moral judgment. This would make the question more clear as, do you even have the ability to determine what is good or bad? But for fun, let's just go with your meaning. The question you are asserting is, do you even have moral obligations to yourself or others? Her answer is still pretty clear. Yes, and she discovered what those obligations are on her own, like everyone else.
Like treat others with respect and do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
This is a problem. The golden rule is not very good outside of a kindergarten level way of thinking. Consider the very real scenario of a guy who likes a certain lady. What would he like her to do to him? Maybe he would like her to kiss him suddenly. By this moral standard, that means he should do it unto her, right? He should just walk right up and kiss her suddenly. Well, of course not. That would be morally wrong. So we have a scenario that shows this golden rule is not worth any amount of gold. It should be something closer to do unto others as they would have you do unto them, as long as that is within your realm of comfort, and not what they would not have you do unto them within reason of the situation. I know it doesn't sound as good as the basic soundbite, but it is considerably more moral.
These are rules that everyone is held to regardless of who they are and what they believe, and anyone who doesn't follow them is deserving of moral blame and guilt because they've done something objectively wrong.
Nope again! There are plenty of people who do not treat others with respect. Of course, maybe you and I have a different definition of respect. You apologized earlier for religious people who use fear tactics, so you know it is happening. But what are you doing about those hate preachers? What are you doing about gross medical negligence in the name of religion in impoverished places in the world? What are you doing about faith healers who cheat people out of money, even if they think they're doing good? These people are not being held to the same rules by Christians as a whole.
So we're not saying that if you don't believe in God, or if God doesn't exist, you can't decide to be a morally good person. We're saying that a good God who created human beings with a conscience that strongly impresses these rules on us is the best explanation for our moral experience and practice.
I don't agree. And no, I don't have to come up with a better explanation, nor show why any explanation is better than that one. But I will. How did you determine that a God is the best explanation? How did you determine that this God even exists? Before you can assert that a God does anything, you have to demonstrate that this God exists. Just like if there is a murder, before you can accuse the butler, you have to demonstrate that there even is a butler. So, before you can use God as an explanation for why something is the way it is, you need to show that the God even exists. So, what is a better explanation for morality than your untestable assertion that a being you can't show exists is the cause of it? According to Frontier for Young Minds, a children's magazine to make this very easy to understand, the answer is, quote, socialization. That is, our behaviors were shaped from birth onward by our families, our preschools, and almost everything we contacted in our environments. Morality is an inner sense of rightness about our behavior and the behavior of others. Our morality has been formed over thousands of years from the combination of both our genes and our culture, rather than just one or the other, end quote. Psychology Today has an article that says, quote, morality can be understood as a natural characteristic emerging from traits that are based on instinct and emotion and shaped by reason, evolving in an intensely social context, end quote. Links for both of these are in the description. Both of these articles provide considerably better explanations for our moral experience and practice than your untestable non-hypothesis.
So I hope I've given you some food for thought. Now it's time to learn this dance.
Allow me to applaud you for being fairly casual in this video. I sincerely enjoyed that you took time to address some concerns about what she had to say, but still tried to keep it light. Apologists tend to take themselves a bit too seriously, and this ending was quite refreshing. James, you brought up some points that I haven't heard before. I think you have some good insight, but it seems to falter once you hit that wall of God must have done it. I think you should go back to all of these points and start from a neutral position. Start with the idea that we don't know if a God exists or not, and see if your responses to these points are different. I think you're starting from the position that a God exists and working your way backward from there. I'm coming at this from a I don't know if a God exists position, and it allows me to be a bit more objective. Consider the criticisms for the arguments you put forth. The basic cosmological argument has been addressed time and time again. What do you think of those criticisms? Why do you still accept that argument after it has been shown to have logical fallacies? I will point out that your wording in some of these has been vague enough that you tend to avoid making specific claims, but it is pretty clear what you're trying to say. If you want to have an honest discussion about anything I brought up here, I am open to engaging. Otherwise, I appreciate the positivity that you brought to this discussion. For everyone else, what did you think? Do you think any of James's arguments make sense to you, or do you feel like I was pretty clear on the issues with them? Do you think I missed something that I should have addressed? Let me know in the comments below. As per usual, hit that like button and do unto me as I would have you do unto me. Also, if you think I am super awesome, you can demonstrate that I am the best explanation for the existence of that subscribe button. As always, keep learning.